flowers or fruit and leaves and beauty, then you have to have what? You have to have deep and strong roots. It's very, very important. If you read about the history of the martial arts, it's an incredible story. I mean, there are depictions of people doing self-defense techniques in hieroglyphs in the pyramids. We're talking thousands of years. In reference to Asian martial arts, there was a monk that came from India. Did you guys tell me today that you've been to India? You did? Okay. His name was Bodhidharma. You know this? Uh-huh. And he traveled across the Himalayas in bare feet through the snow. And he was known to have been a very powerful man. And he was a monk. And his quest was to go to the Shaolin Temple in China and teach the Shaolin monks how to protect themselves. Because the monks had been given the task of protecting the emperor's treasure. At that time, the greatest treasure known to man. Treasures. And it was the first time that entire systems were ever documented and written of self-defense techniques from the beginning to the advanced level. His name was Bodhidharma. And I've been to the cave where he lived and died. And for the last 7 years of his life, meditated. He ate, he slept, and he meditated. Because he had done everything he could to train the Shaolin monks into the most elite fighting force in the world at that time. And it was over 1,000 steps to get to the top. Not easy for a guy with a bad hip. I asked Grandmaster Yates to give me a piggyback ride, and he said no. So I had to hop on one leg. What a journey it was. That area of the world, like so many other areas of the world, had many, many wars. And if you've ever looked at a globe and you see where the Korean Peninsula is, at one time it was called the Chosun Peninsula, before the Three Kingdoms era, the Kokuri, the Shilla, and the Bakshi kingdoms. When you think about where that little area was located between China and the Mongolians to the north and the Japanese, who had known to have some aggression on the other side, poor little Korea had to learn to defend itself. And of course they learned all of these styles. They had to, because they had to learn the styles to learn how to defend against them. And I feel that the Korean martial arts are the most evolved because they were attacked the most. And for centuries. Actually more than centuries. And there was a warrior clan in the very south, Bakshi dynasty. It was called the Samrang. Everyone say Samrang.
Samrang.
Like Samrang, R-A-N-G, but it's wrong. Samrang.
Samrang.
And the Japanese would come in by the thousands. And the Samrang were maybe only hundreds. And the Samrang had a rule that no Samrang warrior was allowed to die until he had killed 100 of the enemy. If you chopped off his arms and his legs, he would bite you to death. I know it sounds like the Holy Grail by Monty Python. But there was a tradition, and it was 100 to 1 or 1 to 100. You were not permitted to die until you had killed 100 of the enemy. And these warriors were so ferocious, and the Japanese Navy continued to bring in warships and continued to get slaughtered when they would land on the beach for decades and decades. Of course, the Samrang would die too, right? And over time, the Samrang forces got to be very, very small. And the Japanese knew at one point, just because of the numbers, that eventually they could kill them all. And then one of the admirals said, "What, are we crazy? We can't kill them. We have to learn it. We have to learn what it is that they know. So let's go in peace and see if we can make friends with them." And they went in peace. The first wave of them probably got killed too. But eventually they convinced the Samrang that if they could come to Japan, they would live the life of royalty. They'd be given a palace of their own, beautiful wife, maybe plural. I'm not sure how it worked back then. And all of the riches that they could ever want. And a Japanese name, which was also a big honor then. So the Samrang, many of them went. And a samurai clan called the Takeda clan actually can be drawn all the way back to the Sam samurai. It's interesting. And the Japanese didn't like it when this finally came out, but a very dear friend of ours, he was the captain of the United States Hapkido team, Dr. Hyung Kim. He's much older than us. He's in his 70s. His best friend is the Minister of Education for Japan, so he'd accessed everything. And he uncovered all of these truths. And it turns out that even the samurai can be traced back to the Samurang of South Korea. How about that? Well, in the Takeda clan, the last of the famous ones that taught was Sokaku Takeda. And there was a young boy named Cheong-sul who was taken at age 4 away from Korea and sold as a slave in Japan. This is during the early days of the Japanese occupation of Korea, around the turn of the century. And the family that purchased this young slave boy, Cheong-sul, owned a candy factory. And they say that Cheong-sul was so cute and charming, and he could dance and sing and play instruments, they fell in love with him. And instead of living the life of a slave, they actually made them his son, or they made him their son. So he was very lucky in a bad situation, right? In how his treatment was to be. Because he was considered a son, he had the chance to train with Sokaku Takeda, the last of that samurai clan. And he learned their arts, Daidaru, Aikijutsu, and Yawara. When Japan lost the war, because of us, you know that, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we ended that war. And Cheong-sul only knew that he was from Korea, and he was from Daegu's, right? Daegu City, Andong. And he went back there, and he recognized nothing. He knew no one. He didn't have any skills other than martial arts, and he started teaching, and he found that people would actually pay him to learn. Among his first students in the very beginning were, was it 11 people? Yes, I think that's the number. Pardon me if I'm wrong by 1 or 2. But one of them was, and the youngest of the group was a boy named Jihan Jae. And Jihan Jae was a ferocious, even as a 13-year-old. He was only 13 at that time. He had seen members of his family be executed there by the occupying enemy. And he wanted to learn how to fight. He trained with Cheong-sul and learned everything that he could. And then he also trained with another monk who had lineage back to the Samurang. That's why I taught you about the Samurang a few minutes ago. His name was Lido-sa. Wise man Li is what that means. And then he had a third teacher later named Grandma, who was kind of a spiritual leader and was said to have had a lot of healing powers. She had a gigantic retreat where terminally ill people would come and be healed and they would end up living. But he learned all of these things and then he made Hapkido. And then in 1985 or sometime in the 80s, I met DoJuNim Jihan Jae and Grandmaster Yates and I and some others, and we've been with him ever since. And so that's how deep our roots go. DoJuNim's the founder of Hapkido. It's the national martial art of South Korea. And he considers me to be his son. His favorite person in the world to travel with and to have helped teach him and to use as his Yuki as partner is Grandmaster Yates. So that's pretty good lineage for us, right?
Yes, sir.
It doesn't get any better. And then Grandmaster Kwang wanted us to be a part of what he was doing. He was the highest ranking Tae Kwon Do person in the world. I'm going to tell you how patient I was. How long was it that I didn't test in Tae Kwon Do? Almost 22 years. I didn't take the Tae Kwon Do test because they didn't want to insult Jihan Jae. And then one day last year he said, "MacKenzie, what you Tae Kwon Do rank?" I said, "Sir, you know what my Tae Kwon Do rank is." "Why?" I said, "Because of you, sir." And he said, "You like him to test? Okay, why don't you?" So, just as it would have it, within a couple of months, we got a phone call that Grandmaster Hwang wanted to come here. I didn't pursue him. And Grandmaster Yates had been very patient, and that's why Grandmaster Hwang came, and he tested. It was the first time ever in New Jersey that people got their rank actually from the ITF. So I have some very special certificates to hand out. And these are the 34 people that trained like crazy. Donnie, before I hand these out, stand up if you would.